The morning my daughter-in-law slid a manila envelope across the kitchen table and told me to review it before Sunday, I didn't say a word. I just picked it up, folded it in half, and put it in the back pocket of my jeans. She stood there waiting for a reaction. I didn't give her one. That was February. By April, she'd be the one with nothing to say. My name is Harold. I'm 63 years old, retired from 28 years with the Postal Service out of Columbus, Ohio. I own, or I suppose I should say I owned, a 4-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Drive that my late wife Evelyn and I bought in 1991 for $87,000. We raised 2 kids in that house. We painted every room at least twice. Evelyn planted a dogwood tree in the front yard the spring our son started kindergarten. That tree is 40 feet tall now. Evelyn passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought it for 2 years, and she fought it the way she did everything. Quietly, completely, without complaint. After she was gone, the house felt like a museum. Every corner had a memory nailed to it. I thought about selling. I thought about it for about a week. Then I stopped thinking about it and started learning how to be alone. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is, moved back in about 8 months after Evelyn died. He'd been living in Cincinnati with his wife, a woman named Becca, and things between them had apparently fallen apart. He called me on a Tuesday night, voice tight, and asked if he could come home for a little while. I said of course. I meant it. What I didn't know was that a little while was not how Becca defined it. She drove up with him that first weekend to drop off boxes, and she was already measuring the rooms with her eyes before she even took her coat off. She commented on the size of the master bedroom. She said the kitchen had potential. She asked whether I'd considered converting the basement. I thought she was just making conversation. I was wrong about that. Within 3 months, they were both living there full-time. My son had taken a remote job in logistics, and Becca had started doing something with social media marketing that she was always vague about. They settled into the house the way water settles into a crack, gradually and then completely. I didn't mind at first. I liked having noise in the house again. I liked hearing the coffee maker running in the morning when I came downstairs. My son and I would watch the Browns games on Sunday afternoons, and for a few months it almost felt like it used to when the kids were young and the house was full. But things shifted somewhere around the 1-year mark, and I can't point to a single moment when it happened. It was more like the temperature dropping in late October. You don't feel the exact day it turns cold, you just notice one morning that you're wearing a coat. Becca started referring to the master bedroom as our room. Not the guest room. Not the room they were using. Our room. The first time I heard it, I thought I'd misheard. The second time, I let it go. The third time, I understood something was happening that I hadn't been paying close enough attention to. They'd rearranged the living room furniture without asking. Evelyn's writing desk, a little oak piece she'd had since before we were married, had been moved to the garage to make room for a standing desk. Becca ordered from Amazon. I found it out there on a Thursday afternoon, pushed against the back wall next to the lawnmower, a spiderweb already beginning in the corner of the drawer. I brought it back inside. I put it in my bedroom. That night at dinner, Becca said the living room looked better with the extra space. I said I'd moved the desk back in. She looked at my son. He looked at his plate. The envelope she gave me in February was a household contribution agreement. 4 pages, printed on actual legal paper, with numbered paragraphs. It outlined a monthly payment of $1,800, described as my share of utilities, groceries, and general upkeep. There was a line from my signature at the bottom. There was a start date of March 1st. I read the whole thing that night sitting in the chair by the window in my bedroom, the one I used to read in when Evelyn was still here. I read it twice. I set it on the nightstand. I turned off the lamp and I lay there in the dark for a long time, listening to the house settle the way old houses do. And I thought about Evelyn, and I thought about the dogwood tree, and I thought about 28 years of walking mail routes in the cold so that I could pay off this house and own it, free and clear, before I turned 60. And I thought about the fact that no one in that house, not my son, not his wife, had ever once asked me whose name was on the deed. I didn't sign anything. I didn't bring it up at breakfast. I just called my attorney the next morning. His name is Phil, and I'd known him for 15 years. He handled Evelyn's estate, and before that, he helped me with a property dispute with a neighbor over a fence line. He's thorough, and he's patient, and he doesn't waste words. I drove to his office on a Wednesday morning, and I sat across from his desk, and I put the household contribution agreement in front of him. He read it. He looked up. "Harold," he said, "you know you own this property outright." "I know," I said. "They don't." He leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a moment. "What are you thinking?" I told him. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "That's clean. That's very clean." He pulled out a yellow legal pad and uncapped his pen. "Let's talk through it. Here's what most people don't understand about real estate. The owner of a property is not required to notify the occupants before listing it for sale. There are legal processes that govern what happens to occupants after a sale. Notice requirements, tenant protections, depending on the nature of the occupancy. But the act of listing, marketing, and entering into a purchase agreement, that belongs entirely to the owner. And I was the owner. My son and Becca were not tenants. They had no lease. They had no rental agreement. They had a household contribution agreement that I had never signed, which meant they had nothing. Phil connected me with a real estate agent he trusted, a woman named Karen who specialized in residential sales on the east side of Columbus. She came by the house on a Thursday morning when my son was on a work call upstairs, and Becca was at a coffee shop. Karen walked through every room with a clipboard and a practiced eye. She stopped in the living room and looked at the space where Evelyn's desk used to be. I didn't say anything about it. She gave me a number that made me sit down. The market in our neighborhood had moved in ways I hadn't been tracking. The dogwood tree was mature. The bones of the house were good. She said with a little staging and a fresh coat of paint in the main hallway, we were looking at somewhere between $440,000 and $470,000. I'd paid $87,000 for it in 1991. I'd refinanced once in 2003 and paid it off completely in 2017. The money sitting in that house was mine, accumulated over 30 years of Evelyn and I doing things the slow, careful way. I told Karen to move forward. I listed it on a Thursday. By the following Tuesday, we had 3 offers. I want to be clear about something, because I've thought about it a great deal. I did not do this out of anger. I know it might look that way from the outside, but I want you to understand what it feels like to sit in the house you built your life in, the house where your wife died, and be handed a document asking you to pay rent for the privilege of staying there. I want you to understand what it feels like to go to the garage and find your dead wife's desk, pushed against the wall like something disposable. I want you to understand what it felt like to lie in the dark that February night and realize that your own child had looked at you and seen a problem to be managed, not a father to be loved. I wasn't angry. I was clear. There is a difference. The offer I accepted came in at $462,000. The buyers were a young couple, both teachers with a 4-year-old daughter. The wife had cried a little during the walkthrough. Good tears. The kind you cry when you recognize the feeling of a house. I liked them immediately. I accepted their offer the same afternoon. The closing was scheduled for a date 8 weeks out. I said nothing to my son. I said nothing to Becca. I went to Phil's office and signed the documents and came home and made dinner. Pork chops, green beans from a can, the way Evelyn used to make them, and sat at the kitchen table alone and ate. I did tell my son eventually. I told him 2 weeks before closing. I sat him down in the living room, his redecorated living room with the standing desk and the repositioned couch, and I told him calmly and completely. I had sold the house. Closing was on the 14th. He and Becca would need to find other arrangements. He stared at me for a long time without speaking. He looked for a moment like he was 12 years old again and had just learned something about the world he hadn't been prepared for. Then he said, "You can't do that." I said, "I already did." Then he said, "This is our home." And that's the part that got me. Not the anger in his voice, but the word he chose. Our. As if ownership were something you acquired by moving furniture around, by printing out a 4-page agreement, by deciding one day that a place belonged to you because you needed it to. I said, "It was never your home. It was my home. I let you stay here. There's a difference." He went upstairs. I heard him and Becca talking through the ceiling for a long time. I washed the dishes and dried them and put them away and went to bed. Becca called me 3 times the next morning. I didn't answer the first 2 times. The third time, I picked up. She said they had nowhere to go on that kind of notice. She said it wasn't legal. She said she was going to talk to a lawyer. I told her that was a fine idea, and that when she did, she should ask her lawyer to explain what tenancy at will means and what rights she had under it in the state of Ohio. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Harold, after everything we've done for this family." I said, "Have a good day, Becca," and I hung up. They were out by the 10th, 4 days before closing. I walked through the house after they left with a kind of feeling I don't have a precise word for. Something between grief and relief. The way you feel at the end of a long, difficult thing. The dogwood tree was visible from the front window, starting to bud. It was March. Evelyn had planted it in March. I stood there in the empty living room for a while. Then I got my jacket and my keys, and I drove to Phil's office. Here is what I did with the money, and I want to explain this carefully because I think it matters. I kept $110,000. That was enough to put a healthy down payment on a smaller place, a 2-bedroom condo in Westerville, near the library and the walking trails along Allen Creek. I had looked at it twice before the closing. It was quiet. It had a small patio. It was enough. The rest, $352,000 after fees and taxes, I put into a charitable trust that Phil helped me set up. The primary beneficiary was a nonprofit called Home Start Columbus, which provides transitional housing and rental assistance to families coming out of the shelter system. I'd read about them in the Dispatch a few years back, after Evelyn died, and the work they did had stayed with me. There was a secondary provision in the trust as well. Phil had suggested it, and I agreed, a scholarship fund administered through the Columbus Foundation for first-generation college students at Ohio State. Evelyn had been the first in her family to get a degree. It seemed right. I am not telling you this to make myself sound noble. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what the money meant to me and what it didn't mean. $462,000 is a lot of money. It is also the compressed weight of 30 years of my life, my wife's life, the life we built together in that house on Birchwood Drive. I was not going to let it sit in an account. I was not going to let it be argued over. My son called me a week after the closing. The conversation was short. He said he thought what I'd done was cruel. I said I thought what he'd done was cruel, and that I suppose we'd both have to sit with that. He didn't have much to say after that. He's called twice since then. The calls have been different, shorter, quieter, with more space in them. I don't know what that means yet. I am leaving room for it to mean something good. I moved into the Westerville condo in April. The patio gets morning sun. I put a bird feeder out there, the same kind Evelyn used to have in the backyard on Birchwood, a cedar post with a platform feeder at the top, thistle sock hanging from a bracket below. The chickadees found it within a week. I brought Evelyn's oak writing desk. It fits perfectly under the window in the second bedroom, which I've turned into something between a study and the sitting room. The wood is the same warm color it's always been. I put her photograph on the corner of it, the one from our trip to the Smoky Mountains, 1998, before the kids were old enough to really remember it. She's standing on a trail, laughing at something I said, one hand holding her hat against the wind. I look at it every morning when I sit down with my coffee. I am 63 years old. I own a home. I have enough. I have a bird feeder and a desk that belonged to my wife, and morning sun on the patio, and a scholarship that will send somebody's kid to college someday. Somebody whose mother maybe worked 2 jobs and still believed in something bigger than herself. I think Evelyn would have approved of all of it. I think she would have especially approved of the part where I didn't sign that envelope. There's a photograph of Evelyn on the corner of her oak desk, the one they'd pushed into the garage like it was nothing. She's laughing on a trail in the Smokies, one hand holding her hat against the wind. I look at it every morning now, and I think about how much of a life is stored in objects, in rooms, in the particular way light comes through a window you've looked out of for 30 years. You don't know what something means to you until someone tries to take it away. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. Out here on my patio in Westerville with the chickadees working through the thistle sock. And the thing I keep coming back to isn't the money, or even the house. It's the envelope. 4 pages, numbered paragraphs, a line for my signature at the bottom. The assumption behind it, that I was too old, too tired, too grateful just to have a warm room, that I would sign, that I wouldn't check, that I didn't know things. That assumption was the mistake. Not a moral failing, not a character flaw, a simple, costly miscalculation about what I was made of. I spent 28 years on mail routes in Columbus winter. I paid off a mortgage. I sat with my wife through 2 years of treatment, and I held her hand at the end, and I kept going after. People who've done those things don't stop being capable of clear thought just because they're past 60. That's not how it works. The years don't hollow you out. They sharpen you if you let them. They teach you what matters and what doesn't, and they teach you the difference between patience and passivity. I had been patient. I was not passive. What I did required all 3 things that I think a person needs to get through this life with their dignity intact. The first is knowing right from wrong and being willing to act on it even when it's uncomfortable, even when the person you're acting against shares your last name and your blood. I didn't sign that envelope not because I was clever, but because I knew it was wrong. Wrong for me, wrong as a precedent, wrong as a way of treating a person who had done nothing to deserve it. That moral clarity was the foundation of everything that followed. The second is thinking carefully before you move. I didn't flip the table the night I read that agreement. I folded it in half, put it in my pocket, and went to bed. I called Phil the next morning. I let the real estate agent walk through the house on a Thursday morning, and I listened to her number, and I made a decision based on facts, not fury. The outcome was clean, because the thinking was clean. The third is simply endurance, the willingness to carry something heavy for a long time without letting it break your posture. I missed Evelyn every day in that house. I watched it get rearranged around me. I found her desk in the garage. I said nothing, and carried it, and kept moving, not because I was weak, but because I was waiting for the right moment to act. And I knew the right moment would come. It came. The money is in a trust now. Somewhere in Columbus, a family is sleeping in a stable place tonight because of it. Somewhere down the line, a kid whose mother worked 2 jobs is going to get a letter from the Columbus Foundation, and their life is going to open up a little. That's what the house became, not a grievance, not a transaction, something that grew outward into the world. I think Evelyn would have liked that very much.